Somehow the two segments that we're going to air this hour tie together. Somehow they tie together. Because in our next half hour, I'm going to be speaking with a financial advisor for the Detroit, actually, he writes a column in the Detroit newspaper on financial advice, Brian O'Connor. He's written a book called The $1,000 Challenge. And Mr. O'Connor was able to, because he lives in Detroit, which is $8 billion in debt, right? Detroit's a fiscal disaster. And the newspaper that he was working for was sold and jobs were being lost, and so one income family, he had to find a way to cut expenses. So what he did was he cut $1,000 out of the monthly expenses of his family in 10 weeks. He's going to tell us how he did that. The book is called The $1,000 Challenge. I think I'll send Brian O'Connor to Washington, and he can sit down with the Democrats and with the Republicans and their various factions, and maybe he can help them cut out some of their financial stupidity. But then again, maybe not. Gerald Celente is with me on the Roy Green Show on the Corliss Radio Network. I always look forward to Gerald being on the show, and I know you do as well. We have so many requests for Gerald's participation. Publisher of the TrendsJournal. He reviews what's going on in the world, looks ahead as what's going to happen, tells us what is going on, and in no holds barred terminology we all understand. I have a tendency to turn off my microphone, Gerald, and just listen to you, because you say things in a way that, and I'm a professional broadcaster, I've been doing all this all my life. I think to myself, if I could talk like Gerald, I'd be a happy man.
Oh, Roy, thank you.
No, but you have an ability to explain to people in terms we understand and in terms we appreciate what it is they are doing to us. And so I'd like to turn this over to you. A couple of things I want to talk to you about that were in your Summer Trends Journal. But I want you to talk to us about what's going on in your nation's capital, where the politicians can't decide how to talk to one another and stave off a crisis, which the world's bankers today said, and they used the word terrible, if the United States government, partial government shutdown doesn't end by Thursday, and the United States is unable to start to pay some of its debts, the bankers are saying the consequences will be terrible. I know you love politicians, and I know you love bankers, so I'll be quiet now.
Whether it's the economy, whether it's taking the nation to losing wars, or the wars on drugs, whether it's education, whether it's health care, and I don't say this sarcastically, I say it with full fact, everything Washington touches, they destroy. There's nothing that anyone could point out and say, wow, what a great job they've done. It's the inepts and the incompetence. Again, you look at the track record, by their deeds you shall know them. How about the lovely Afghan war, the longest war in U.S. history, with no end in sight and only a losing end at that? The Iraq war, you remember those weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda that didn't exist. And you go back to Vietnam. I mean, you can just keep adding them up. And then, as I mentioned, this war on drugs, or the NSA, isn't that a sweet one? And you're having someone on from Detroit, and as I heard, and as everyone knows, Detroit went bankrupt. But the United States had enough money to almost launch another war against Syria, and let's not forget the war in Iraq cost an estimated $1 trillion. And you just keep adding it up with the NSA. You have those people that may be listening right in now because they listen in on everybody. According to the Financial Times, hardly a left-wing newspaper, $80 billion a year in U.S. taxpayer money going to fund the NSA to listen to us, but not a dime for Detroit. So what you have here are a cross between sociopaths and psychopaths that are passing themselves off as, quote, lawmakers and policymakers. As you aptly quoted, the world bankers are warning of dire consequences. Debt ceiling. China calls for a world to be de-Americanized. They are destabilizing the entire global economy because of their inability to come to an agreement. And let's not forget, this drama has been going on now for essentially 3 years. If you go back, it was, we're going to go over the fiscal cliff. We're going to go over the fiscal cliff. And then in August of 2011, they came up with the idea, well, we're going to postpone it until around now. And, of course, back in 2011, Standard & Poor's downgraded U.S. debt. Here's the deal. The United States is $16.7 trillion in debt. There is no way on earth they are going to pay it off. What I'm going to do, and I'm making this very clear, I don't give financial advice, I only speak for myself. If there's no agreement by Tuesday, I'm pulling my money out of the banks. And I'll tell you why. Go back to 1933. These are facts. Under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they called in all the gold. If you didn't bring it in, you broke the law. And you had to sell it to the banks, to the federal government, because in those days the dollar was pegged to gold. It was pegged to gold at $20.62 an ounce. What they did, Roy, after they thought they had most of the gold in, they repegged the dollar to gold to $35 an ounce. So you just sold your gold at $20.62. After they got it in, they say, yeah, it's now worth $35. You know what that did? That devalued the currency. So you lost 70% of your purchasing power. I believe that there is an outside chance, if they don't come to an agreement, that we may see another Cyprus situation where they're going to call a bank holiday, blame it on each other, devalue the dollar, and that could be a way of paying off payable debt.
Tell me this, Gerald. Do you think these people in Washington, and you know them far better than I do, I'm just an observer from Canada, but I've been observing it as closely as I can for some time now. Do you believe they actually have an agenda, or are they totally unable to come up even with the most fundamentally simple agreement to keep the economy going and to stop this? They call it a partial shutdown of the economy. It's like saying a partial blockage of your main artery in your heart. It's only partial, so let's not worry about it too much because the patient's still breathing a little bit. Are they just totally incompetent? What's with these guys and women?
Well, you know, I began my career. I began at 23 years old at a graduate school. I was running political campaigns in Westchester County, which was the richest county in the U.S. at the time. And I was the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate. And I also designed and instructed American politics and campaign technology, which I taught at St. John's University, and spent 6 years in D.C. as a chief government affairs specialist for the chemical industry. And one of our chief writers for the TrendsJournal is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Reagan. So yes, I do have some inkling of who these people are. And to answer your question, they're a combination between sociopaths, psychopaths, incompetent, and inept. Yes, they know what they're doing. No, they don't know what they're doing. Yes, there is a plan, but no, they can never get it fulfilled. And it's all about them. And you talked about the government shutdown. You go to the news, you look at the headlines, the vets are storming the memorials. They closed down American parks. I want to put this in perspective so everyone could really understand how they really shaft the people at the cost of virtually nothing to make points and to fulfill their agendas. Roy, the entire federal budget for the federal park system is the grand total of $3 billion. The entire federal budget is essentially $4 trillion. That comes out to 0.07% of the federal budget. But what it goes to show you is that who do they attack and who they inflict the pain the most upon? It's the people. The other things they cut back are Head Start. And you mentioned about a partial shutdown. So here was the headline news, 800,000 government workers to be furloughed. What doesn't make the news is they brought back 400,000. Remember before I mentioned about the NSA?
Yes.
And how we the people are funding the NSA at $80 billion a year? Well, you know who the money went to? They brought back government contractors, 400,000 of them. 400,000 private contractors But close those parks, no Head Start, cut back on medical care. We have wars to fight, drones to send into foreign countries, and on and on. So what you have here, all of a sudden I've had this epiphany. And it's the same thing in your country. Why do we have political parties running our governments? You go back to the founding fathers of the United States, whether it's Washington, Jefferson.
Gerald, let me get you to hold that thought for just a second. I do have to take a break, but it's an interesting question. Very interesting question. Why do we have political parties running our countries? That's something nobody's asked that I'm aware of, but it's a really significantly important question, because one of the things I've been saying is, in Canada, what we need is a group of independents sitting in our parliament, members of parliament who are not affiliated with any political party, who can hold the balance of power, or at least sway parties in the directions they ought to be going in order to satisfy the needs of the people pragmatically, because that is their job. They tend to become loyalists to their parties more than they're loyalists to the country, in my view. We'll take a break. We'll come back with Gerald Celente on the Roy Green Show on the Corus Radio Network. He's the publisher of the TrendsJournal. Stay with us. My guest is Gerald Celente. He's the publisher of the TrendsJournal, joining me on the Roy Green Show on the Corus Radio Network. And we were speaking with Gerald about governments and how they, particularly the United States government, how they run the country or misrun the country. And there's no other way to put it, because there's only one reason the United States is facing what it's facing, and that is this shutdown and the mess that it's in. And that's the incompetence of the people and the intransigence of the people who are in government. There's no other way to put it. Gerald, you asked a very interesting question. Why do political parties run governments? I'd never thought of it in those terms, but why do they?
Well,
because we elect them, because it's perceived to be no other option.
Well, that's because there is no other option. And you really said it as we were taking the break. You said, you're talking about the non-aligned and how most people now have loyalty to the party and not to the people. I mean, to paraphrase what you said. And I agree. Who made this thing up? Here's a quote. This is from John Adams. "There is nothing which I dread so much as a division of the Republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution." And Washington, he said the same thing about political parties. To Eisenhower, if a political party does not have its foundation in the determination to advance a cause that is right and that is moral, then it is not a political party. It is merely a conspiracy to seize power. So as I look at the political parties, and having been there, to me, it's no different than having the Bloods of the Crips, the Bonanos of the Gambinos, the Lanskys of the Schultzes, or the Democrats or the Republicans. I love this lovely language that they use. They call it campaign contributions. Could any adult say bribes or payoffs? And that's what's happened. There is no government of the people, by the people. It's for the multinationals and for the most powerful. And we're seeing it in the charade that they call a democracy in the United States, as they are now threatening the fragile recovery that's barely a recovery on the global scale, and that's only happened at the level it's happened now because of all the cheap money they've been printing. But even with that cheap money printing, they are now causing this fear and hysteria for absolutely no reason at all.
So where are we going, ultimately?
I don't know.
Where will we be? You've said your concerns. You've talked about what you would do come Tuesday if there is no agreement. Where, logically, do you believe we will be a week from today?
My gut tells me, and again, guts don't, count in these kind of things, or feelings or emotions, when you see this thing being stretched on as long as it has. I would have thought this government shutdown would have been over. I thought it would have been over in 4 or 5 days. And now we're going into what? We're in day 12. I think that they're eventually going to come to an agreement to postpone the inevitable, as the Republicans tried last week, and they'll forestall it, and we'll have some kind of an agreement that won't be a solid one. That's my best guess. I don't think they'll come to a solution that's going to really address the issue, and they will continue to raise the debt ceiling and drive the nation deeper in debt. The worst case scenario, as I said, and they've done it before, and I believe that Cyprus was the canary in the mine shaft to see what would happen and what would the repercussions be when they called a bank holiday. And so you do. By the way, when the bank holiday hit in the United States back in the 1930s, they already did a test run, oddly enough, or ironically, I should say, in Michigan. That was the first place where they had one. And, of course, you're going to have someone on following me from Michigan. So that, to me, Cyprus was the one. What will the world reaction be? What will happen? Because I could say this with full confidence. There is no way on earth that the United States will be able to pay off its $16.7 trillion worth of debt.
This is the question that I've been asking myself as well. How do you pay that level of debt, particularly when you continue to go into deeper debt and at an accelerating rate? How do you do that? How does it come to the point where the United States can't even pay the interest on its debt?
Well, that is the point, and that's why when they talked about tapering, that means that interest rates are going to go up. Because the only reason, as I mentioned, there's a recovery is because of all the cheap money. Look, I bought a building over here. I'm in Colonial Kingston, New York, as you know. Mm-hmm. I bought a 1763 building out of the passion and love of it and restoring it and keeping it. I got a 15-year mortgage in March, locked in at 2.85%. And you were asking the question, how are they going to repay the debt? When the tapering stops,
Gerald, I have 20 seconds.
When the tapering stops, interest rates go up. They cannot pay back the debt, and it's going to cause a calamity. And that's why I'm saying the only way out is a devaluation. A devaluation of the currency. That's what they did in 1933. It could happen again.
Thank you so much for the time.
I really
appreciate talking to you. Thank you.